Welcome to the Explainer. So let's just dive right in, shall we? Today we're exploring those strange, fascinating glitches and those weird, unnameable feelings that literally every single one of us experiences in our daily lives. You know exactly the ones I'm talking about, right? Those moments where your mind just does something entirely unexpected and reality feels just a little bit off. Well, today we're going to put a name to them and figure out exactly why your brain is playing these tricks on you.
Seriously, have you ever felt a glitch in reality? Like your brain just momentarily stopped working correctly or completely misfired on you out of nowhere? We have absolutely all been there. Just standing in the middle of a room, scratching our heads, wondering if our mental hard drive just completely crashed.
Okay, picture this and tell me this isn't the most relatable thing ever. You get up from the couch with a clear, specific purpose. You walk right into the kitchen, and the very second you cross the threshold, boom, your mind goes completely, utterly blank. You just stand there, trying to grab the thought, but it's totally gone. You are literally frozen in the doorway, just staring blankly at the fridge.
Now, what's absolutely fascinating is that this isn't actually a memory failure at all. It's something called the doorway effect, and it's really more of an organizational glitch. See, your brilliant brain actually organizes memories based on your environment. When you're in a specific space, it groups your intentions just for that exact context. So walking through a physical doorway literally triggers a mental reset. Your brain effectively closes the file on the previous room's context and opens up a brand new one. The intention you had? Well, it simply got filed away back in the living room.
Act 1. Emotions you cannot name.
Imagine being totally safe and warm inside while a massive, absolutely miserable thunderstorm is just raging outside. There is a name for this profoundly good feeling: chrysalism. It's defined as the amniotic tranquility of being indoors during terrible weather. But why does it feel so good? Well, it's because your brain registers the extreme contrast. The noise and the misery of the storm outside actually hands you a psychological permission slip to just stay put, ignore the world's demands, and simply exist safely right where you are.
And then there's this beautifully melancholic concept called hyreth. It's a Welsh word, describing a deep longing for a home you can't return to, or maybe one that never really existed at all. The crucial thing to understand here is that this isn't just your standard nostalgia. It's a very specific grief for a feeling or for a past version of your life that has simply moved on. Think about missing your childhood neighborhood after it's been all paved over, or longing for the early days of a relationship. Technically nothing bad happened, things just changed. But somewhere in that gap, that's exactly where hyreth lives.
Act 2. Everyday glitches in memory.
Okay, so we all know déjà vu, right? That weird moment where a brand new experience feels inexplicably familiar. But let's slow down for a second and look at its exact opposite, jamais vu. And honestly, this one is incredibly weird. Jamais vu is when something you know completely well suddenly feels totally unfamiliar. Imagine a route you've driven 100 times, or even a really simple word you've written your entire life, and suddenly it just looks completely alien to you. It's literally just your brain glitching out and deciding to call something totally familiar entirely new.
And speaking of our memory glitching out, we absolutely have to talk about the Mandela Effect. Remember the Monopoly Man's monocle? Yeah, it never existed. How about the famous quote, "Mirror, mirror on the wall"? Actually, it was always magic mirror. And Pikachu's black-tipped tail? Nope, it has always been completely yellow. Millions of people passionately share these exact false memories. But why? Because your brain doesn't record events perfectly like a video camera. It actually fills in the gaps using logic and strong expectations. The Monopoly Man wears a top hat, so your brain just logically expects a monocle, and millions of brains filled it in the exact same way. Crazy, right?
Now let's consider the rather tragic reality of childhood amnesia. For most of us, our very earliest memories begin around age 3 or 4. Before that, almost total darkness. Why is that? Well, first off, the hippocampus, which is the part of your brain that stores long-term memories, is still developing. Second, memory relies really heavily on language, and pre-language experiences are incredibly hard to store mentally. So despite living your first few years in full, vivid emotional intensity, that 2-year-old version of yourself is practically gone forever.
Okay, let's try a quick experiment together. Say the word you see right here out loud with me and say it rapidly. Chair, 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 chair. Keep going in your head. You notice how suddenly the word completely loses its meaning? It just becomes this weird, totally random noise?
That specific glitch is called semantic satiation. And what's really fascinating here are the mechanics behind it. When you repeat a word rapidly, the neural pathways that connect that specific sound to its actual meaning get temporarily fatigued. You're making them fire so incredibly fast that the connection just weakens, and the meaning literally fails to load. Your brain just needs a short few-second break for the neural connection to reset and load correctly again.
Act 3. When spaces feel wrong.
Now, this phenomenon maps out the famous uncanny valley. If you look at comfort levels versus human likeness, you'll see our comfort is super high for a simple 2D animation, like a little Stickman. But then, comfort absolutely plummets into severe unease when you look at an almost human CGI character, before finally rising again when you see an actual, real human. So, when something looks almost human but not quite, like a highly realistic robot, it triggers this deeply ancient evolutionary warning system. Your brain is essentially pattern matching, and that almost but not quite signals a subtle threat, an illness or deception. It's your deepest instinct screaming that something is definitely wrong.
And hey, speaking of unsettling things, what about a space built specifically for people when all the people are suddenly gone? This feeling is known as Kenopsia. Think of the eerie texture of an empty high school during summer break, or a massive stadium just an hour after a huge game ends. These places were designed entirely for crowds. The whole architecture assumes people are there, so when they're entirely empty, that stark absence of people creates a void that your brain finds genuinely strange and, honestly, super eerie.
Now, consider derealization. And if you've ever felt this, I want to be really reassuring here because it can be absolutely terrifying. It's the feeling that reality is slightly fake, like you're suddenly watching your life through a pane of glass or walking around in a really convincing movie set. Honestly, it's actually just your brain's stress response doing something fairly unhelpful. When you are completely exhausted or overwhelmed, the brain dials down the intensity of your experience as a kind of buffer. It can make you feel numbed out and panicked, but I promise, it's really just a temporary protective measure.
Then there's this incredibly wild one, Alice in Wonderland syndrome. Imagine lying quietly in bed and all of a sudden feeling like your hands are incredibly massive, or that the room is physically stretching miles away from you. This is a real neurological condition where the brain misfires, completely distorting your perception of size, distance, and scale. It's an electrical misfire in the brain's spatial processing centers, and it is highly believed that Lewis Carroll himself experienced this, which directly inspired his famous story. No way, right?
Act 4. Altered states of reality.
Have you ever felt the heavy weight of this word? Onism. It is the deep, profound frustration of being stuck in just one body, one single timeline, and one sequence of days. The really crucial takeaway here is that every single choice you make is, by default, a choice not to live 100 other lives. Every path you take permanently closes off paths you won't. And as you can probably imagine, the internet makes this feeling so much worse, because now you literally have a front row seat to every single life you aren't living sitting just one click away.
And that beautifully brings us to Sonder. Picture yourself just sitting in typical afternoon traffic. You glance over at the car next to you at some totally random stranger, and for a split second, it really hits you. That person has an entire massive universe inside their head. They have a whole childhood, a very specific set of fears, an argument they're currently replaying, best friends, a whole story just as vivid and complex as your own. And you are just going to drive away when the light turns green and never know a single thing about any of it. It's this massive, completely overwhelming realization of human scale.
So, I want to leave you with this somewhat profound thought. Which version of your life are you missing right now? As you navigate your one single timeline in this vast universe, pay attention to these glitches, these unnameable feelings, and these absolutely incredible ways our brains try to process reality. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today, and remember, always keep questioning what you see.